Hey guys, welcome to Hip Hughes History. Who's ready to call a state convention to propose new amendments to the Constitution? Well, a lot of Americans are, so I thought in this lecture we would go over the procedure for how that would occur, some of the different groups that are trying to do that, and specifically the Liberty Amendments which has been proposed as kind of a way to restore the Republic to its original intention by Mark Levin in a book that he wrote. But let's go talk about political science and the Constitution. I'm getting all warm and fuzzy. All right, guys, let's go giddy up for the learning and go get her done right now. So before we get started, why don't we read a little bit from our old favorite book, the Constitution, and specifically Article 5 and the part of it which talks about how you can change the Constitution, and here we go. The Congress, whenever 2/3 of both houses shall deem it necessary, shall propose amendments to this Constitution, or on the application of the legislatures of 2/3 of the several states shall call a convention for proposing amendments, which in either case shall be valid to all intents and purposes as part of this Constitution when ratified by the legislatures of 3/4 of the several states, or by conventions in 3/4 thereof, as the one or other mode of ratification may be proposed by the Congress. So what we got there is a lot of words. Now, the Constitution has already undergone 27 amendments or changes. Now, 10 of those, of course, came in the very beginning. That's the Bill of Rights. So basically, 17 times we have gone through one of those procedures to change the Constitution. And all but one of them are exactly the same. 2/3 of both houses of Congress have proposed a new amendment, and 3/4 of the state legislatures have voted in those state legislatures to approve that amendment, and then it's ratified into the Constitution. Now, only the 21st Amendment, which rescinded prohibition, did that go to state conventions for ratification. But the proposal part, the 2/3 of both houses, that's always been the same. This is radically different. By design, Hamilton and Madison put this puppy in on purpose, was to give the states a way to express their sovereignty by not having to go to Congress, by not relying on the federal government, but taking the reins themselves. Now, it's going to get really complicated because this has never been done before. And to be honest with you, I think that the language is a little bit lazy. That really, it doesn't really talk about, does it need to be the same application? Should it be for a specific proposed amendment if the states want to have a constitutional convention? Or is it just a free-for-all where everybody can get groovy and do anything that they want? Now, in all truth, throughout American history, 45 states have put in some kind of application calling for a constitutional convention by the states. So under the broadest view, they have enough. And that means that Congress should immediately tomorrow morning call for a state constitutional convention to propose new amendments to the Constitution, but that's probably not going to happen. Most scholars agree that the application needs to either be the same specific issue, like the balanced budget amendment. Now, that's been rolling through the states for 30 years now or somewhat, and I believe they're up to 28 out of the 34 necessary. And then they would call a state constitutional convention where all the states would gather to basically propose that amendment be added to the Constitution. Now, the ringer is you need 38 states for ratification. So even if you get to 34, you're still going to have to get it ratified by going to the state legislatures or having a state convention where you get that magic number of 38. So the balanced budget amendment is one example. The Wolf Pack, which is a progressive group, has been trying to get states to apply to overturn Citizens United. They're up to the grand total of 5. But we also have a very serious group called the Convention of States, a group backed by Mark Levin and also senators like Senator Jim DeMint, which are looking at a broad state constitutional convention where they'd be able to propose multiple amendments to the Constitution. In fact, they've pinpointed about 11 what they call Liberty Amendments, which we're going to run through in a moment. But they have 12 right now. But most scholars agree that it would have to be similar language in the application to go to Congress. And then once that happens, basically Congress should have their hands tied, that they wouldn't be able to regulate this body. They would have nothing to do with it. This constitutional convention called by states would be run by the states. Now, how that would look is anybody's guess. Would they need 2/3 of a quorum to make that proposed amendment a reality and then go to ratification, or could it be done by simple majority? Would it be shoestringed, is shoestringed a term, to kind of the one specific issue? Like, let's say the balanced budget application goes through 34 states. Once they call for that constitutional convention and it's put together, would they be tied to that one specific amendment, or could it be a free-for-all where they'd be able to propose anything? And that is up for grabs. We really haven't done judicial review on that, but if you look at the intent of the founders, this was a way for the states to maintain their sovereignty and to change the Constitution without having to go through the central government. So since the Convention of States probably is the most organized group and maybe the most likely to be able to call for this new constitutional convention of the states, why don't we look at their proposed 11 liberty amendments? Now, these were written by Mark Levin in his book. They're not formally proposed, but these are ideas that are being tossed around by that side. So let's go do it right now, and then when we're all said and done, we can brush ourselves off of the political scientist dust and leave comments where where they go, down in the comments below. So, restoring the republic, and as we get into these 11 ideas, we fundamentally just explain kind of both sides, why some people think it's a great idea, most of them, and some, are aghast at the suggestion. But basically, the right would say that these are amendments that are needed to restore the republic, that the federal government has gone out of control, that federal bureaucracy and the way that the interstate commerce has been interpreted, the elastic clause has been interpreted, has really led us to a runaway government, and that we need an amendment or multiple amendments to kind of whip us back in line, that it's not going to be enough to do it legislatively, that we're just too far off the grid, and that these are big ideas to really kind of, go back to what the founders intended, which is a very restrained government where states are sovereign and where the federal government is kind of put in its corner.
Nobody puts baby in a corner.
So it won't be able to, tyrannize liberty. That's the basic idea. But people on the other side, they would argue that these are horrible ideas, that basically that the right is afraid, they would probably say, that they don't have the numbers in the future. So the only way that they can maintain control and they can get what they want, which is, an unregulated government where big businesses are allowed to do what they want and people are allowed to discriminate, is to amend the Constitution. Progressives would say that we already have a restrained system of checks and balances. In fact, we have 4 kind of layers that you have to go through from democracy to actually having legislation, being the law of the land. And most Western democracies have 2 or 3 levels. 4 levels is plenty. They say that these liberty amendments really represent not checks and balances, but locks and chains that are going to stop the people, even if the vast majority of the people want something, let's say universal health care, from never being a reality because of these proposed amendments. So you can love them, you can hate them, but you probably should know them, because that's what smart people do, is they know stuff. So let's do it. 1 through 10. We'll do them fast. So the group sponsoring the states of conventions would want, number 1, term limits, that they believe that people are in Washington too long, they become creatures of the nest itself, and that we need to rein that in by having term limits. I believe 14 for House members, 12 for senators, but basically saying that your time in Washington is limited and where you're going to replace you. Of course, people who don't like this would say that, number 1, by flipping people, that you don't have veterans down there that know what they're doing, you have rookies all of the time, and that you're really taking the choice of who's going to represent the state and the people out of the hands of the people, and that's the first one, term limits. So number 2 is a big one. It doesn't sound like a big one, but people that believe that the federal government has gotten out of control. Now remember, the 17th Amendment changes the way that we choose senators. Senators are supposed to represent the states themselves. So originally in the Constitution, they were chosen by state legislatures. Today, because of the 17th Amendment passed during the Progressive era, they're chosen by the people themselves. This was done Back then, they said because of the vast amount of corruption that was going on within big business and the state legislatures. Now, people that are writing these liberty amendments, they know that this would have a dramatic change on the country because in 34 out of the 50 states are dominated by Republicans. So therefore, if you take 34 and you times it by 2, I think you get 68 Republican senators. So therefore, in terms of passing legislation, nothing would get out of the Senate that would be progressive. And of course, those that defend repealing of the 17th Amendment say, again, it's restoring the republic to the way it's supposed to be, that we're supposed to have states that are sovereign, that are lending their voice to the federal government, and then if anything, the House of Representatives represents the country as a whole. But senators are supposed to represent their states, so we should let the states choose them themselves. So that would be the second thing, would be restoring the dignity of the republic by repealing the 17th Amendment. Good idea, bad idea? Leave it down below. Number 3 is dealing with this pesky Supreme Court. Now, those on the right think that the Supreme Court over its course has gotten it wrong a lot, that it's interpreted things like the Interstate Commerce Clause in not an original, intentional way, and has really created, in a sense, law through their interpretation. So they want to rein that in. And one of their ideas is to have term limits for Supreme Court justices. Of course, we know that they serve lifetime terms now. They're not pressured by the whims of people, that they're kind of the referees sticking to the rule book themselves, and that if they've done anything wrong, there's an impeachment process to get rid of them. But by turning them over, I think 14 years was the number in my head, that this would, number one, change the makeup of the Supreme Court. But if you pair that with getting rid of the 17th Amendment, the Senate is going to be a huge roadblock for any progressive Supreme Court to get, ratified if they were nominated by a president. So definitely trying to affect judicial review, rein the court in through some term limits for those black robers. So number 4 is a balanced budget amendment. We talked about this previously, that there's been an effort, and they've gotten 28 states to apply for a specific constitutional convention by the states just for that one proposal. But this would basically cap the amount of money that the federal government would be able to spend. You can't spend more than you bring in. Now, those that support this amendment, of course, say that it's going to bring fiscal responsibility, and at the same time, it's going to shrink the federal government. It's going to get a lot of things checked off their bucket list, like getting rid of maybe Medicare or Social Security, or things that they see are outside the realm of what the Constitution should be allowing. Now, of course, those that are against this would say that it would hamstring the federal government, and that if there were emergencies and things like that, it would be very difficult to make our obligations, and that sometimes you have to spend to make. So a balanced budget amendment's been out there for a long time, but that's definitely one of the Liberty Amendments. Number 5's a little bit weird. Define the tax deadline as the day before the election. And maybe you can help me down in the comments below. I'm trying to figure out why. I'm thinking that they want you walking into the election booth, grrr, federal government just took all my money, and that's going to influence your vote. So I'm not exactly sure on one, but that is number 5 of the proposed Liberty Amendments. But that's definitely one of the proposed amendments for the Liberty Amendments. That's right, tax day, the day before the election. So number 6 is periodic reauthorization of federal bureaucracies. So you would take things like the Department of Education, and every few years its charter would run out and would have to be reauthorized by Congress in order to stay into existence. So of course this is a way for the right to shrink the size of government, to get rid of what they see as departments that aren't constitutional. It's not the job of the federal government to deal with education, or let's say maybe the EPA for environment or something like that. So because it's very difficult to get rid of them, let's just amend the Constitution to make it easier to get rid of them. Of course, progressives would be aghast at this, because most of these departments would probably spend most of their time trying to stay in existence rather than doing the regulatory work that progressives see as their duty to keep our food supply safe, to keep the air clean, to make sure that, every child has a chance to learn. All right, how about that? Number 6, periodic reviews and reauthorization of federal bureaucracy. Say that 10 times fast. Number 7, the Commerce Clause. The Interstate Commerce Clause has been kind of a thorn in the side of the right for a long time because the Supreme Court has really used that, whether it's with Obamacare or the EPA, to, in a sense, expand the federal government's ability to regulate things. Because the Interstate Commerce Clause has been seen as giving the federal government some sort of control over things that deal with, commerce in many states, whether it's air crossing or railroads or whatever it is, giving the federal government more power. Conservatives would like to see this really in what they think is the original intention wrote about in the Federalist Papers as being something to safeguard states from other states interfering with their commerce. So they might want to redefine the Interstate Commerce Clause to limit its scope and limit the regulatory powers of the federal government. Number 8, eminent domain. Eminent domain is in the Constitution. It basically gives the federal government the right to take your land. That's right, no grazing on that land. We're going to build a railroad. And this is basically something that conservatives and some progressives alike see as too much power for the federal government, and that there needs to be more specifically crafted language to make sure that the federal government isn't abusing this power and that the sovereign states and the right of the people outweigh the federal government's ability to demand that it's for the public good to take your stuff. So number 9 deals with Article 5 itself. Because it's such a pain to amend the Constitution to get these liberty amendments, one of the proposed liberty amendments is make it easier to do more liberty amendments. So literally change the percentages in Article 5, so perhaps it's going to be only 2/3 need to ratify from a state convention rather than the 3/4 necessary. But they're looking at definitely tinkering with the language of the Constitution to make it easier to amend the Constitution in what they see as a more perfect republic. Of course, progressives might like that if they get their way, but if not, they'd probably be against it. All right, number 10, nullification. Nullification is basically a state trying to nullify a federal law. This has happened before, and it pretty much caused darn near civil war. But basically, this would allow this amendment 2/3 of the states to nullify federal law, to basically say, Obamacare, no, 2/3 of the states are against it, so we don't care if it's federal law, we're going to be able to ignore it. And some of the people that are for this Liberty Amendment, they want to extend that to Supreme Court decisions as well. So if it's something like, gay marriage, if 2/3 of the states don't like it, it would nullify that Supreme Court decision. Many progressives would be aghast at this. They would say that this is, unconstitutional, that they're trying to rewrite the Constitution to get what they want, and that they would be, in a sense, really limiting the ability to protect liberty for those that are at the most risk of losing liberty. But needless to say, 2/3 to nullify federal law, 2/3 to nullify Supreme Court decisions. Get out of here! You ready for number 11? I am. Number 11, ID, please. Number 11 is photo ID to vote, to amend it into the Constitution. Of course, voter laws like this have been springing up across the country, and we'll give both sides of it right now. People on the left and progressives say that it should be easy to vote, that by putting barriers in front of people, difficult for some people to get to the DMV. Some people don't have licenses. The poorer you are, the less likely you are to have it. And that voter fraud has never really been a problem, that this is a way that the right is trying to use to limit democracy, to limit the amount of people that vote, because the less people vote, the better they do. Of course, the other side is that we have to, maintain the sanctity of elections, that we have to make sure we know you're the person who's voting, and that this is only common sense, that, to safeguard democracy, you need to be able to have some type of regulatory procedure to make sure that people that are voting are legal and that it's a valid and legal vote. So there you go, my learning friends. There's the weird part of Article 5 and what a constitutional convention called by the states might look like and some of the different pathways that we might get there. And the 11 Liberty Amendments, you tell us what you think about them, either individually or collectively, down in the comments below, because I believe that there's still some room for some American debate in a civil manner. It might just be what the Republic needs right now. All right, if you're not subscribed, make sure that you do that. It's just a button press. It's like right there. Just press the stupid button. And visit us online at www.hitpews.com. Now I'm going to say what I say at the end of every lecture because I believe it with all of my teacher heart. Where attention goes, energy flows, and we'll see you, my learning friends, next time that you press my button.